This episode of the Southern Hemisphere No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Curly's Ag. Curly's Ag has been in the business of developing and manufacturing innovative ag tools for the past 5 years. In that short time, they have amassed an impressive range of new and patented tools now readily available for you. Curly's Ag is home to the world's only commercially available battery drill-powered power harrow, as well as Curly's Cracker 2, an automatic broad fork making soil prep and ease in any condition. Curly's Ag is also known for the Elia 3000, a multi-purpose tilther, mulcher and bed former all rolled into one, as well as the most recent and anticipated tool for every farm, the Hand E. The Hand E is redefining the market garden toolkit and taking the hard work out of farming. It can lift 300 kilograms with ease and smoothly maneuver over your garden bed without damaging crops. The Hand E's PDO powers the Elia 6000, mulcher and tilther, a power harrow, an auger, a compost spreader, a harvester, and more attachments. If you like to know more, please jump on their website at curlysag.com and feel free to contact them for more information. Curly's Ag are distributing in the US and soon opening up in Europe. This episode is also brought to you by Activista.
Activista's mission is to assist growers to develop soil-focused, diverse cropping systems with commercially viable seeds, appropriate equipment and soil inputs, and advice and feedback for all growers' current needs and particular situations. Activista is working diligently behind the scenes to maintain and develop their supply of seeds for profitable market farming. Small bulk quantities are at or near cost price. They have a non-GMO pledge and aim to source the best hybrid and heritage varieties to suit each segment and conditions of growers' needs nationally. Activista takes the battle out of importing specialized tools, providing sales and warranty support with all of their equipment range. They carry most, if not all, parts and have a direct line of communication with suppliers. Activista encourages customer feedback and gives personal attention to all inquiries as they see this process as a vital part of our vibrant, developing organic community.
G'day and welcome back to the No-Till Market Garden podcast. My name is Mikey and on today's episode I'll be chatting with Oliver Shorthouse from Romaro Farm, Victoria. In our conversation we call upon Oliver's experience as a restaurant manager and consultant and we explore how he currently grows an incredible range of diverse crops for restaurants. We touch upon the importance of building clear processes when managing a team, what to consider when choosing your sales outlets and much, much more. I hope you get as much out of this episode as I did. It was an absolute cracker. But before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Aboriginal peoples of the Kulin Nations, the traditional custodians of the land on which we talk today, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening in today. Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Not a worry. I wanted to ground the start of our conversation by exploring a bit about your pre-farming professional life, which, from what I know about you, has really coloured and shaped your farming business. Could you share with me a little bit about your time as a kitchen manager and then consultant?
Yeah, absolutely. So I initially I come from a front of house background in restaurants. Done that since I was 15 years old, and suppose been around the world a little bit and worked in Italy and England and whatnot, and came back to Australia and got into restaurants and high-end restaurants, working for a group of people who have a number of restaurants. And we did that. I was in the job for 8 or 9 years in total. But sort of began as a fairly, not a small restaurant, but a somewhat disorganised restaurant. And so the process for me in that job was to organise it and put into place the systems that allowed for expansion. After that, I went into, with the same group, we opened another restaurant and then another one and then another one. And so what happened was I got quite experienced at both refining systems and implementing systems in a way that we hoped would work. And so obviously sometimes we didn't get it right, and we tried again the next time, and we whittled things down over time. And so I was in restaurants for 20 years or so, coming from a front of house background, but then managing the entire businesses. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, we purchased our farm, and I suppose through that process over those 9 years, we've become more and more focused on the farm and less on the restaurants until, 3 or 4 years ago, we were out of the restaurants altogether.
I as a restaurant manager, and I'm really hoping that later in the conversation we can kind of draw a lot on the experiences and then use your consulting and managing experience in the restaurant to kind of maybe use it as a lens to explore the small farming scene.
Yeah.
And first of all, as a restaurant manager, what was your interaction and perspective of the fresh food industry? Had you worked with any small suppliers, or was it mainly through resellers and middlemen?
Yeah, I suppose I wasn't really exposed to it pre-working for the first restaurant I worked at in Melbourne. But I do remember, we'd get these deliveries on a Saturday morning. It's our busiest day of the week. And the farmers would come in with a ute full of produce, and they bring in box after box of zucchinis and pumpkins and leaves and all sorts of stuff. And I remember probably having a bit of too many conversations with them, even though it was our busiest day of the week. And I just really wanted to know what they were up to and what they were doing. And I suppose from there, I really understood that there was an option to sell direct. I had done some farming previous to that in Italy, but that hadn't been direct to restaurants. And seeing it as a restaurant manager, seeing the produce coming in every week and the changing over the seasons, and talking to the farmers at this restaurant in Melbourne, I really got a passion for it. I thought, I think I want to be a bit like that, and probably not as conscious decision as that, because I was pretty happy in the restaurants, but certainly that's where it probably began. And but prior to that, probably not all that much exposure to really good quality or really fresh organic produce. And I don't know if that's because the time changed, like the times changed over that period, or if it was just the restaurants that I was working in. But that's where it probably began for me.
Is working with farmers, like you're saying, obviously you had interactions, you were meeting them, you were chatting and getting quite inspired. Is working with farmers directly something that chefs are kind of are interested in doing and pursuing, or is it something that they'd want to do if they had the time and the energy to invest in it?
Oh, I think there's a whole range of factors. First of all, I'd say that 10 years ago, it was not very many people who were doing it. And now everyone says they want to do it. Whether or not they actually fulfill that goal is another thing. I think the quality of chefs that are out there, some people are not able as well to deal with the flexibility of the small farms, and so sometimes the consistency, but also that's the negative side. But the positive side is the flourishes of how good the produce is. They don't know how to transform that into a dish that can work on their menu. So I find that these days a lot of people really want to do it. A lot of chefs really want to be involved. Whether or not they actually end up creating a menu full of small farm produce is another thing. I'd say there's a fairly select group of people who can do that, and the rest of them sort of buy bits and pieces and use it where they can. It's certainly over the last 5 or 6 years that's increased significantly the interest of restaurants and cafes and small food stores. So it's not just the high end. The interest in buying small and buying local is grown dramatically. But there's a whole range of factors in whether or not they actually end up achieving that. Cost and the reliability of the farms, obviously, and also the style of restaurant and the style of menu that they have may well mean that it's not possible to bring in the different seasonal products. So the ideal menu for us, it would be one, or for a small farm, would be one that is maybe a bit vague, or so that you can substitute in different products, or it's one that changes so regularly that it's literally written on the whim of what comes in from the farmer. But those ones are, those ideal restaurants are few and far between.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, I think, later in the conversation, really unpacking a lot about that, because I know you've built a really strong business around working with restaurants, obviously using your background, I think, to leverage some insights and relationships. But before we dive into your farming journey, I also wanted to, like I said before, maybe also shift into your transition from maybe the manager into the consultant role, because I'm really interested in businesses in general and the crossovers between, and wondering if you saw any similar patterns that were appearing in how various restaurants manage their operations, and were there recurring challenges that you were helping to diagnose and fix across businesses?
Oh, look, the recurring theme is generally, and this comes across into farming as well, and but I'd say the recurring theme is disorganisation, which leads to ruining your life. Like, if there has to be one theme, it's that people have this really successful business and they're very good at what they do. They've got a dream, they execute it, it's going really, really well, and then suddenly they've got no work-life balance. Their personal relationships are breaking down. Now, I think that's probably the area which I'd say, okay, yeah, that's quite significant. And you can see that where it would cross into farms, because farms can be so consuming, so much work. In fact, the work never ends. That I think my interest is in how you can systemize, how you can delegate, how you can authorize your staff, and sort of give them the opportunity to improve and increase and take over the control of a business. And that's really the process that it goes through, where you take a disorganised or business which is maybe not fulfilling the owner's lifestyle requirements, systemise it, write down the processes, get the right people in the right positions, and then that allows the owner then to not maybe remove themselves, but gain back a bit of that lifestyle that was one of the reasons that they started the business for in the first place. And that's a recurring theme through also as we run the farm, is that making sure that it's not taking over our lives in other ways or in ways that we're not comfortable with. So make sure we keep our lifestyle in good balance and healthy and all those sorts of things, which I think farms have the potential to do, even though we think we're all getting into a really healthy lifestyle because it's outdoors and it's physical and whatever else. I can definitely see how they go too far at times.
Yeah, it's a great insight, and I really agree with you. I think sometimes we also relate to small scale farming or farming in general as being a really isolated industry or workplace, not realizing the crossovers, like you're saying, that a lot of burnout that farmers are feeling isn't something that doesn't happen in other industries. It's something which you need to have a lot of, like you're saying, you got to be very aware, very conscious about designing a business in a way that I think supports your capacity and really serves you in what you want to achieve.
That's right. And then whether that's financial or lifestyle or whatever it is, but I think that's the recurring theme as well for me, is that come up with the idea that you want to have in the longer term, and design your systems and your farm or your business around achieving that, rather than just have the whole thing snowball along and you think everything's going fine until it's maybe not. Because if you do have a vision in the end, your North Star, you can at least design around that and have some hope of achieving it. Whereas if you don't design, if you don't plan, then obviously you end up not getting to where you want to be and having unintended consequences.
So we've got I've got a number of great topics leading to that, and you've hinted at them in terms of management and the economic side of it. And I really want to dive into that, but I want to be aware that I want to give you opportunity just to kind of tell us a little bit about where you're standing now. I remember at the beginning of your farming operation, you were farming on a small plot on your home farm site for a number of years until you expanded the production and moved to a new Renton site, which is pretty amazing. It's totally in tunnels and greenhouses. Could you share a little bit about your shift into farming and what prompted you to eventually grow the operation?
Yeah, so we had our first season, essentially the first summer we bought the property. We were commuting into the city. It's about an hour commute into Melbourne. No intention of becoming farmers permanently or in a full-time basis, just to have some space. We grew that year, and then one restaurant liked it, and then we added another restaurant, and basically what would happen is on Saturday mornings I'd harvest, and Saturday afternoon I'd drive the food in. Having done a full week at work, no cool room, no real idea of what we were doing. We just grew some stuff, picked it, and took it into the restaurants. We did that for 4 seasons, and then we had our child, our son Leo, who sort of put into perspective a bit what we needed to focus on, and we couldn't manage a full-time job and a growing farm and a new child. So took the decision to go part-time in the job, and over the several years after that, we, I suppose, realised that there was a future in having a farm as being our main source of income, which led to us, as you said, in taking on these tunnels in 2019. So we've been there for 2 seasons. We grew on just 3,000 square metres, 3/4 of an acre, at home, with the usual, difficulties of growing outdoors, which is weeds and too much rain, which we have up in the Dandenongs where we are. Obviously, during winter, where we have much less produce, and if any. And we knew that there was, if we wanted to make a business that would afford us, the lifestyle that we wanted, we'd need to expand. Now, we searched for probably 3 years for tunnels around us. We knew that our area, there were a lot of tunnels. There's a lot of flower growers around us and berry growers, and we saw tunnels everywhere we drove. So we knew there must be onto something, and we searched, and finally, having rejected quite a few which were 15 minutes away, 20 minutes away, we found some which were a minute and a half drive from our home base, and we jumped on them. So we took over 8 tunnels to begin with, which is about 3,000 square metres, and really everything just grew beautifully. I suppose I wasn't aware how much of a difference tunnels would make to our growing, but it allowed us to go full time. And it allowed us to grow and grow and grow, which is where we're at now. So we've expanded now onto 45 tunnels in total. It is totaling around 1.5 hectares of protected culture, and we still have 3/4 of an acre of crops at home on our home base. We do all the processing and washing and packing on our home base as well.
In the early, when you first started, were you leveraging some of those industry relationships with restaurants to be selling? And also, what were you growing at the time? Were you growing a broad spectrum and trying to bring in, or were you in conversation with them about things?
Yeah, so I had a really good relationship with one particular chef right in the beginning, and we'd literally sit down in winter with the seed catalogue, and he'd just go through and circle all the things that he was interested in. And that gave me a bit of an insight into I suppose the psychology of what was interesting, and which was basically, things of a different colour, things of a different shape, and things that he had seen internationally. So with those three things in mind, that really drives what we choose to grow. Um, Certainly in the initial stages, we did go to people that we knew, but that didn't last all that long. Pretty quickly, through the use of Instagram, we started to get people applying to get more produce from us, to the point we just had so many people on the waiting list that we sort of thought, oh well, we either give it up, or we expand and take advantage of it. So obviously we did the latter. But yeah, we more so than leveraging the contacts that we had, apart from in those very, very early days, we leveraged the understanding of what our food was going to be used for. So, certain things we'd grow because we knew they were going to be garnishes. Certain things we grow because we knew that the demand was very strong for them. Certain things we grew because chefs would request them. And certain things we grew because we had a particular affinity with, all things Italian. So in the early days in particular, and still to a point now, we try and focus on things that interest us, which is, the chicories and the radicchios and Italian style tomatoes and Italian zucchinis and all that kind of stuff.
I like that you mentioned your social media, because I was scanning over it, and not only is it well managed, I noted obviously that you highlight mainly the various crops you're growing and kind of what's new on the menu, so to speak. And for me, it feels as if you almost use your Instagram as a type of visual fresh list for restaurants and customers, rather than as a personal storytelling medium like many other farms do.
That's right. That's a really conscious decision I've made, based on the fact that we can be pretty private people. We don't, we don't need to tell our story. We don't feel the need to tell our story too much, but also based on, who our customers are, and basically the prism which I view all the Instagram on and all the marketing on is it doesn't make chefs excited, and that's our main criteria. So often I'll take a photo, I think, oh, I'll go and post this, and then I think about it, I think, oh, it's not that exciting, so I'll just can that one and try again. So I'm glad you like it. It's simple, and I don't have much to say on it, but I like the photos.
Now a number of years down the track, working with a lot of restaurants, as you said, you started with opening up a catalogue and looking through it, the bright and shiny, and what kind of spoke to the chef at the time that you were chatting with. How has your crop selection developed since then? Have you canned a whole lot of varieties that don't work for you? Have you honed down and gone to some more conventional, high producing varieties that can kind of, you guarantee you put the seed in the ground, you're going to get something back? Or is it really being driven by what those restaurants are asking from you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it goes in waves in a way. We'll have a period where we try to achieve success time and time again. So we focus, and so we've made a move towards certain hybrids, and also heirlooms that we know work and know that sell critically. But then I think sometimes we have a feeling that it's gone too far. So, for example, 3-4 months ago, I just felt there wasn't anything interesting going on. So we have started having someone for 4 hours a week just sowing new, interesting things. And their remit, one of our staff members, is to just ignore anything else that's happening on the farm, but do new stuff, new, interesting things. As in, it's kind of like, okay, it's a growing budget. It's an amount of money that we set aside. We say, well, we're happy to have, it's going to produce vegetables and it's going to produce new plants, but it's actually more of in my head, I'm sort of put it more off to a marketing budget to say, well, our business has to be exciting as well. It can't just be reliable. So in that sense, I think, as I said, it sort of goes in waves, and we'll try and focus on one thing. And we for example, we focused really heavily on salad, on our salad mix, sorry. And so we dedicated 11 tunnels, 3,000 square meters just to our salad mix. And then once you have that nailed, then you can start to go, okay, experiment again. Then you find another thing to focus on. So we focus on purple sprouting broccoli. You nail that. You nail the rotations. In the meantime, the salad mix is obviously going along nicely. And then we experiment again. And then we choose another thing to focus on. And that's worked really well for us, because the restaurants do need a certain level of consistency, but not only do they need a certain level of consistency, our business grows because we're consistent. Because people feel a sense of security in that I can get this now, I can get this in 2 months' time, I can get this in 6 months' time, and they really appreciate that. And as a result, they purchase more of it. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've often, I think the scheduling, the planning of crops for restaurants is something which I think can either be, some people find it a bit daunting. I think some restaurants have a reputation of picking up a crop, working it into a menu for a couple of weeks, and then sidelining it once either they change the menu suddenly. How have you gone about developing a relationship with the restaurants that means that as you develop these crops, like you're saying, the purple sprouting broccoli, and start expanding the amount you're growing of it, and it becomes more central as a product, how do you ensure that doesn't just suddenly get dropped off across the board by the restaurants?
Well, I think the only way you can do it is by having a lot of customers. The idea that you can lock someone in or plan things so perfectly, for me, I haven't found that to be an outcome, or to be an outcome, a strategy that I can achieve. So we aim to just grow, and solve the problem of selling it later. And if someone drops us, then we're sad, but we change. We go looking for someone else. And now what that means is that we do sometimes end up with too much, and we often end up with too little. I mean, most of the time we don't have enough to satisfy our customers. So we fortunately don't have to deal with that. But I suppose in the future, we could end up with a situation where we have to look at a different outlet, and in which case we might do a pop-up market. In the last year we've done veg boxes that we've cancelled now, but that was always an outlet to use up and to highlight smaller amounts of things that we had that we couldn't take to our restaurants because we didn't have enough, or maybe we had an abundance of it, so therefore went to the box system as well. But in terms of trying to lock people in, or really, try to guess what they're going to use, I think it's a game that you're never going to win. And even if you try to, I don't think the customer, the customer, if they don't want to buy your produce, they're not going to buy your produce. So there's no winning outcome there. When there's a few times that we've been burnt on things like that, growing certain things that chefs have requested, and we've grown, and then we've come to market with them, and oh no, I don't want that anymore. It's like, okay, that's a real problem. But we've just never seen it as something to get upset about, and more as an opportunity to go, okay, who can we sell this to? And then sometimes that results in in good outcomes too.
In terms of moving produce, in a previous conversation with you, you told me that you'd actually even worked with a delivery company that's actually moved your produce up interstate.
That's right. So it's part of, I suppose, as part of the response to COVID and the various lockdowns in the various states, we made a decision to move into Sydney as well, which was both the decision based on the size that we're becoming, but also I wanted to be part of the Sydney restaurant scene, because there's some great restaurants up there. And it also gives us just that little bit of flexibility in terms of, well, if Melbourne gets shut down, then Sydney maybe picks up a bit. Obviously, Sydney at the moment is locked down, but Melbourne picks that up as well. And it just gives, and that way you also look at two different markets who maybe purple sprouting broccoli, to use again, is popular in one place and not in the other, or vice versa. So it just gives a little bit of a backdrop if you do need to move something.
How many restaurants, to give us context, how many are you working with currently?
We sell to about 25 or 30 restaurants directly, so where we have direct relationships with them. And we also deal with two resellers or wholesalers who will sell into Sydney and into Melbourne. So we probably go to another 40 or 50 restaurants in smaller amounts via wholesalers as well. And we manage that through sending out a mail out again to those customers that to enable those customers, even though they're not managed by us, we don't hold their accounts, they still know what's coming up on the farm.
In terms of building pricing around crops, I know a lot of farmers have a real difficulty in terms of working with restaurants purely based on how do I price my vegetables. I know in the farmers market scene, it's a lot easier. A lot of people just go to grocery stores and do a match up and across to other farmers selling there and kind of make it. But in the restaurant scene, how are you going about pricing, and specifically unusual crops that aren't comparatively on the market?
Oh, a whole range of ways. Look, going to the supermarket is a good option as well, and I do that just to check on things. The reality is that there's no difference between the prices that the greengrocer or the supermarket are charging directly to the consumer and what the restaurants are paying to their wholesaler. Because the wholesaler may get it cheap from the market, they may be able to sell a lot of it to this customer, but they're still having to hold it, take the risk, deliver it to the restaurants, etc. So essentially, the public isn't paying any more for vegetables than restaurants. Restaurants are paying the same price, if not more, because they expect a higher quality of vegetable and a fresher vegetable, and they're first to send things back if they're not up to scratch. So we certainly look at the prices that the supermarkets pay. I ask the chefs directly, what do you pay for this? I ask my wholesale customers, what do you charge for this? And based on that, I can basically decide whether to grow it or to not grow it, rather than, and I say that to point out that rather than go, it takes me this long to sow it, this long to plant it, this much water it uses, this long to harvest it, I work the other way, and then I go, okay, well, therefore it's $10 a kilo. I work the other way and say, well, here's the price in the market, or here's the price in the restaurant industry. Can I produce it at a profit margin that I'm comfortable with? So, for example, green beans or beans in general, I'll just never grow them because there's no way that I can produce them at a price that is profitable for us at our scale. So, but the answer is basically you don't have to be scared of charging for the produce, because the restaurants are happy to pay for quality produce, and obviously it needs to be fresh, and it needs to be clean, and it needs to be reliable. Your business practices need to be sound in order to sell to them, but they're not trying to buy the cheapest produce out there. At least the people that I deal with are not trying to buy the cheapest produce; they're trying to buy the best produce. Yeah,
100%. And I think I've personally experienced that as well. That they're looking for quality. A lot of these restaurants, they want to showcase it, and I think it'd be interesting to actually have a few conversations with some restaurateurs and see if they experience that quality in how it interacts with the way they cook, essentially, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like at the end of the day, we're never going to. They need to be able to see the quality on the plate. So we're never going to sell brown onions to a restaurant, because the price that I can achieve on that then is not worth them doing it. And they would never, then, because those brown onions are going to be cooked to oblivion and never, no one's ever going to see them. So why would they bother spending the extra money on them? Whereas other things that are of high quality, are fresher, have less time to the plate, that you can actually tell the difference, where a customer is going to feel the value of that. then there's a reason to spend the money on the quality produce.
Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to give a shout out to our Patreon members at patreon.com/no-till-growers. This site, of course, is the lifeblood of our work, and we appreciate so much the support. It makes things like this small series possible and just generally enables us to keep our work free and open to anyone and everyone. We can pay our creators for their work and then keep giving that work away for free. If that's something you believe in, please consider pitching in a few bucks at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Also, there are some perks there, like first dibs and discounts on merch, books, events we do in the future, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs this week to Chris Devaney, Kenny White, Stephen Smith, Ojai Roots, Scott Snodgrass, Jay Mill, Jacob Arthur, Jean-Martin Fortier, and Yannick Laplante. Big thanks to all of our show supporters. All right, back to the interview.
You were talking a moment ago when we were chatting about price, about profit and understanding where the profit is in the crop, and keeping track of sales figures and being able to analyze data isn't something which comes naturally to, I think, every farmer, particularly the need to identify and adjust production to meet where the profits are at. What advice can you share about managing books and identifying profit in the crop?
Yeah, I suppose I'm unusual in the sense that I do enjoy that side of the job. I enjoy running a report and organising it so I can see the highest revenue or the highest bunches sold or the highest average price or whatever that is. And then every periodically I'll also do the same. I'll do the process and then divide that by the number of beds that we have, or the number of linear meters that I've taken that have been dedicated to that crop, to work out what the revenue per meter is, and that's basically how I work it out. I mean, there's other factors, obviously time it takes to do the whole process, including propagation and training and trellising and then harvesting, and how long that whole the life cycle of the plant is. There's all that to take into account as well, but the critical one I look at is the revenue per linear meter, and from that I make most of the decisions. And sometimes it's an organised thing where I'll run it after having grown something for 12 months or for 6 months or 3 months. But most of the time it's just me getting out my calculator in the field and going, okay, it looks like I can achieve 4 bunches from this plant. It's taken me about 3 or 4 months to grow. I know I'm going to get this sort of this yield, and this is how easy it is to flip it back in. And I just do those numbers quickly on the fly at every opportunity. And in fact, every time I harvest something, every time I plant something, I'm always thinking, is this a profitable crop? And that's based mostly, as I say, on the revenue per linear meter.
Do you find that number stays fairly consistent across a season for each crop, in the sense that if I went out in the field, ran the numbers on a crop, maybe coming back another year later and running those numbers, or seasonally, I'm assuming between summer and winter, when crops take longer and shorter, that's going to affect yield per linear meter as well?
Well, yes and no. I mean, ideally, the situation would be that you narrow down your decisions to grow only those ones that have a very high revenue per linear meter. Unfortunately, you can't run a small diversified farm like that, because you'd end up being lowering your price per bunch, or your average selling price so low, because you'd have such an abundance of a single crop. So does it change over the years and over the seasons? I mean, I would hope that my revenue per linear meter increases over the years. It's a result of efficiency and crop selection and health of soil and all that sort of thing. But there are certainly some crops that are there for diversity's sake rather than revenue's sake. and interest sake rather than revenue sake, and also, my own personal interest in growing certain things and not growing other things. But I think that you can only have those sort of labour of loves when you are achieving the other objectives in revenue-based objectives. Otherwise, you're not going to be there tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those draw card crops that you're talking about, even the ones that aren't going to be feeding the bottom line completely. I know in the farmers market scene personally, there was a lot of crops that, weren't always making the cut as well as we wanted to, but they would be consistently week by week drawing people in, either because they were unique, like you said, they had an extra colour or something that really caught people's eye and the customers. So I can definitely hear the importance of including those in a crop selection.
Absolutely. And you have to also look at, the farmers market is an area that I haven't done a lot of work in. But if you compare it to, say, it's another argument for focusing. So we focus on restaurants so that we can achieve the outcomes that the restaurants want, which are interesting varieties. Whereas if I was doing a CSA, I think a CSA does want to have onions in there. It does want to have potatoes in there, green beans. You've got to provide that diversity. And those are the decisions that we've made, is to not do the farmers markets and to not do the CSAs, because we really want to focus on what high-end cafes, high-end restaurants, high-end food stores were interested in. So I think it's really important it's another factor of, it's not just money, it's also who you're growing for. And what do they want, and what are they going to value, and that's going to affect how you plan your crops.
Well, let's dive into that, because I know a lot of new farming business, when they're starting out, it can be often difficult to know exactly what are the best sales outlets or avenues for moving product. And I know the advice that I've often heard is to cast the net wide in the first year and then slowly narrow and refine your sales outlets as the business develops. Is that something which, from your experience, rings true, or that you would advise?
Certainly, it makes sense to me. It's something that we did early on once we went full time. So while the whole time we were part-time farming, I always had another income. So we just sell to restaurants, and it didn't really matter what happened, because it was my Saturday morning hobby in a way. When we went full time, we said, okay, like your advice is, cast the net wide. So we bought a flock of chickens, and we had eggs. We did a little farm gate market on farm, out of the shed every Saturday morning. We did the restaurants, of course. We did the food shops, of course. And we looked at other people who were doing box stands nearby, so we sold to them. So we looked at all those different options, but we never did the farmers markets, because I couldn't, because I made that calculation that we then used later on to say, well, I can't see the value in going to spend a full day somewhere and picking in a sort of hopeful manner, and then maybe ending up, with still produce left at the end of the day and not knowing really what to do with it. So as time went on, and we had to make decisions about what outlets to sell through, we kept coming back to what's the most efficient way to sell things. And that has remained for us the restaurant. So we've dropped the eggs, because there was never any money in selling eggs, but we felt that it was something that the public, our local community, wanted. But we couldn't raise the price high enough to actually make it profitable. Likewise, the farm gate, we dropped and brought in a box system, which was great, but it was so labour intensive that we just felt that, despite the fact that it was a great business, that it would have been wonderful for another farm, for our farm, it didn't suit us right. So we decided to move on for that. And we've always just looked for the most efficient way to grow produce, the most efficient way to harvest produce, the most efficient way to wash it, pack it, and then get it into our customers' hands. And that for us has remained restaurants. It also happens to be my background. It also happens to be a passion of mine, and all of my staff as well. They all, most of them come from restaurants, and everyone enjoys eating out and being part of that scene as well. And there's a lot of pride for them that comes from selling to these restaurants, for them as well. So there's just so many factors of how you decide what your streams are, your revenue streams, and your markets are. But for me, it always comes back to, okay, I couldn't bear to stand there at market all day and maybe not sell out. I couldn't bear to spend the whole day packing boxes and then standing around waiting for customers to pick them up. It just didn't seem like the type of business that I wanted to run.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of people recently, and it's I think sometimes farmers get excited about selling in a specific way, whether it be the romance of selling to their community through a CSA, or they want to display the fullness of their produce at a farmer's market. But I think these sales outlets, they kind of fit nicely into a social media picture of the small scale farming, but not necessarily the reality of what a specific business context might need to thrive. And it's nice and refreshing to kind of hear that, you started off somewhere, but you had to really be sharp and kind of ruthless in being honest with yourself in what was going to be something that holds your business and keeps it thriving for a number of years.
And they are difficult decisions, because I really liked having the chickens, and I liked having them around. I liked that process. I really liked having our veg boxes. I really liked doing the Saturday morning market out of our shed. I would probably really enjoy going to a farmer's market, and occasionally we'll do a pop-up farmer's market style as well if we have excess produce. And they were tough decisions, and I miss them. But at the end of the day, the benefits are so great of having the time back, in particular, that I wouldn't do it any other way now. But everything's different as well. Everyone's got different outcomes that they want from their farm, and that's personal and financial and all sorts of things. But these are the decisions that worked for me and our family.
I want to shift the conversation back to what we spoke about originally, being management. And I know through some of my recent research and farm visits that I've been doing lately, I've come to the conclusion pretty quickly that I think human resources and staff management are some of the most under-talked about and appreciated aspects of business success, and even self-management if you're a solo operator. With a solid farm team that you have, and I'd like to hear exactly how many staff members you have at the moment who are operating the market. Let's start by unpacking a little bit about how you tackle efficient task management.
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is that the reason we have staff is because I enjoy working with staff. Working by myself, I can't get motivated. I feel, I get a sense of loneliness if I'm out there just by myself doing these tasks. And I think those are common themes for everyone. People enjoy working I shouldn't say everyone, but even my staff, when they're working by themselves, I know that they get lonely if they're just by themselves doing something for too long. So it's nice, it's social to work in a team. So it's part of the job that I really enjoy. And it's always been part of my career in the restaurants that I've enjoyed mentoring people, seeing them get better at what they do and taking over tasks perhaps that they didn't do before. So when it comes to the staff side of things, it's something that gives me extra energy. I like doing it. And it means that we can produce a lot more, and as a team we feel like we've really achieved something. In terms of the task management, it's about what I mentioned early on about the restaurants, is about documenting really well what's done, having standards, having understanding, training people in a way where you show them and then you have them do it while you're watching, and then you have them do it by themselves and monitoring and then checking back and seeing how you're going a week later and then checking back 3 weeks later, so that you end up with a staff member who is confident, who's had their concerns about a task or a responsibility dealt with, and that also that task can then be passed on definitively by the manager, or in this case myself, but by any manager, to allow the manager to then go on to do other things and eventually have that staff member train another staff member. So one of the things I really try and work on here, and I think it's a particularly, the farm is a particularly useful medium to work in, because what we do is we say, okay, well, today you're going to prepare the bed for this. And we'll broad fork and we'll rake and do whatever we need to do. And then today, then we're going to plant the seedlings. Okay, so then you're going to plant the seedlings. And then, okay, now you remember those broccoli that you planted in, row 10? Okay, today you're going to harvest them. And then we go back and we say, okay, you're going to harvest it, but remember that you've got to harvest next week as well. So take that head, but don't take that head. And remember, next week we might have 100 to do. So don't be too aggressive, but get what you can this week. And then once that's, cropped out, we say, okay, now let's bring in the mulcher and mulch that crop out. So we try and give people ownership over a crop, and beds and sections of beds, and then eventually sections of the tunnels and section of the operation. And that results in them feeling both fully trained, feeling a great sense of ownership over the task. And it also enables me as the manager in this case, to go, right, that person now fully understands that area of the business. And I can basically wash my hands of the management of that. And I come in once a week and I can talk to you and see what, we can solve a problem together. And often and this is such a consistent theme in the restaurants as well, is that the staff are better than you, and they're better than me at doing things. They're so capable, and you've got 5 or 6 or 7 brains trying to work out a solution to a problem. All you need to do is give them the opportunity to do that, rather than take ownership of the whole thing yourself and just have them doing micro tasks. Say, okay, well, this is an area. What do you want to do? What does the soil condition look like? What do you want to add into that? How do you want to change it? What are we going to do? And I think the results for me is that we can grow to a size that we are, which is a size of a business that can't be managed by 1 or 2 people, but also a sense of satisfaction for both parties that we're learning that things are going well. So the employee says, okay, well, now I've really nailed that crop or that section or that process, and I can feel like, hey, I've really, can now move on to other things, having seen this staff member take hold of it. And the feedback that I get from my staff is that that's been really beneficial to them. And so now we just look to cross-train, which has other really great benefits, including, if someone's on holiday or someone gets sick, or we get a new staff member on, they can be trained by that other staff member. So it's a big part of what the farm is at the moment. It's a big part of what I do, but it's also a part of the farm that provides me with the most satisfaction.
Your insights about training are really important, because I think, like you said, the moment I think when a farmer shifts from being a sole operator or potentially working with a partner to becoming a manager, they suddenly find themselves in the driving seat of being an educator of sorts, a mentor, a trainer, a facilitator, and not always do those practical skills come directly. And the one I picked up from you, which I think is really useful, is that it's basically shadowing, in which you seem like you go in and for a period of time you're there doing the task with the staff member, repeating it until you can see that they've absorbed and understood that, which I think it's a very simple but it's quite profound, because I do hear a lot of stories of farmers getting staff members on, and they take that as an opportunity to get other things done, and then returning to see what has been completed, and often sometimes being disappointed the task wasn't completed the way they expected. And I think sometimes it comes down to a lack of clarity around a task and making sure that a staff member knows what to do completely.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it is a profound process, in the sense that it is very simple, and you work through it, and you come out with an outcome which is just wonderful for everyone involved. And I suppose, and you've spoken about it as well, but the flip side is that if something doesn't go wrong, if you come back and that task isn't done properly, the likelihood is, unfortunately, that it's not the employee's fault. It's your fault, because you haven't been clear, because you've only given half the task, because you've given an impossible target for them. Say, can you pick these in 5 minutes? Well, the crop this week is not good enough to do that. So the downside is that when you get disappointed, unfortunately, it's only your fault. It's always your fault. And I'd say that's in 95% of the time. It's probably always the fault of the manager, is that you haven't explained it well enough. You haven't provided the tools or the authority or the autonomy to do that job well. And that's the unfortunate side of things. But once you realise that, it then allows you to explain and talk about and ask those questions at the end. Is there anything else you need from me? And, have I explained everything clearly? Do you have any questions? I'll be back in 5 minutes to check up again. Once you know the pitfalls, you become better and better at delegating, and better at training, to the point where you get less frustrated and less disappointed, because hopefully, and your staff feel less frustrated and feel less disappointed as well, because obviously when things go wrong, no one feels good about it. But I think that's something that I remember speaking very clearly to people about, particularly business owners who are frustrated with their employees for one reason or another. And it always comes back to, it's very unlikely that you have chosen someone who doesn't want that someone's coming to your place of work and doesn't want to do a good job. So given that premise, if we accept that, people come to work and they want to do well, more than likely is that they haven't been trained, they haven't been given clear guidelines of what success looks like, haven't been given the tools or the autonomy or the authority to make decisions around how to get around these problems. And that's why you're finding this, this employee stressful or hard work or difficult. And that's, I think, why people find employing staff so hard sometimes, is because they haven't realised that, that it's all about delegation. It's all about clear communication and clarity of instruction as well.
On that topic about clear instructions, and we've started to dive into what does it mean to be working with a team. And if you began calculating the amount of energy and input that goes into actually getting a staff member up to scratch, and then, like you said, moving on to a point where they're almost managing the field in so many ways without even needing you to be there as a guide, it's that time investment in a staff member is incredible loss when you have a high turnover of staff, which does happen on a lot of farms. How do you make sure that you're training, you're keeping staff members happy, and you're holding on to them for a period of time where essentially that training starts to really pay its off in the day-to-day?
Well, I suppose it all begins with identifying, being set up to take an employee, and that means, having the right business structures in place in order to bring people on, and knowing exactly what you want that employee to do when they get there. And then the big one is recruitment. And through good recruitment, that will filter out any of the not necessarily bad employees, but people who might not fit the type of role that you're offering. So I'm fortunate. I've done a hell of a lot of interviews and recruitment over the years for the restaurants, and it's something that again I find really satisfying, because when you choose the right person, it's just a wonderful outcome for all parties. But it begins with recruitment, and then it progresses through to the induction of the employee into the organisation, and the very careful management over those first few weeks and months, where you're at sort of that point where I'm not really sure if this is the right situation for me, and the employee's going, oh, I'm not really sure if this is the right situation for me either. But by working with them over that induction period and over those first several weeks of that are really critical to their success, you can end up with an employee who is obviously engaged and is doing a great job for you. I think that as well, farms are really fortunate places of work for this, because basically on day one you can have someone doing a job that is productive, whether that's bunching radishes or weeding around the plants or doing transplants, or I don't know, even running a seeder up and down a bed. I mean, I wouldn't look past doing any of those things on day one. Washing carrots, there's all sorts of things that even on day one, that staff member is going to be doing useful things. So the pain is much less than in other types of businesses, I think, in getting people trained up to doing work where they're actually, of benefit to the business. I can think of plenty of examples where you might need to induct someone and train someone over months before you start to get productive work back from them. So there's the induction, there's that training period, there's a touching base constantly. End of the day, first day, how'd you go today? Was it what you were thinking? Is there anything you need from me? What was most surprising to you about coming to work on your first day? What did you really love about it? What didn't you enjoy so much? At the end of the first week, doing the same process, and then several weeks after that, doing it again. Okay, you've been with us for 3 weeks now. How's things going? How are you finding the commute to work? How are you finding the work itself? Is there any issues that you've faced? And I think particularly, with this type of work, you want to. The more contact you have with your employees, the better. And then on an ongoing basis, we do catch-ups, and we call them appraisals, but they're really about an opportunity to sit down in a semi-formal setting and say, we think you're doing this really well. We think these things need some improvement, but in general, how are you finding the farm? What do you love about it? What don't you like about it? Are there OH&S issues that I need to know about? Do you need any equipment? Have you got any ideas? Where do you want to be in 6, 12, 18 months' time? And that's how we look to engage staff over the longer term, by ensuring that they have things that they're looking towards, and that training outcomes or different tasks or responsibilities that they might be interested in. And that's what keeps people in the restaurant industry and in farms working for you, so you don't need to spend half your life recruiting or training.
I'm really hearing from you that idea of that clear as kind and kind as clear, in whereby open communication, checking in, and like you said, I think sometimes in the small scale farming scene we shy away from some of those more, I'll call them institutional structures or formalized structures that a lot of other workplaces do to kind of, I don't want to say it's check performance, but to, like you said, it's about communication. It's about seeing the person, making sure that they're being seen, being felt, being heard, and that really gives them like you said, it empowers and gives ownership to them in the workplace, not merely being a cog in the machine.
Absolutely. And look, I think, if you were a really, really great manager, you don't need any of this stuff because you're interested in people. You listen to people. You can get you've got the emotional understanding to see where people are at and what they're enjoying, what they're not enjoying, what they're doing well, etc. But these systems are really just about saying, well, if maybe you're not a born manager, maybe you don't get off on seeing other people be trained really well. That's okay. But by using some of these systems and a systemized way of managing staff and of checking in with them, that actually makes that's all the structure you need to be a good enough manager in order to achieve what you want to achieve. So you don't have to be perfect as long as you can use some of these HR systems that do work.
Staffing in the Australian context it can be a fearful thing for a lot of people, just purely based around the cost of labour. Taking on an extra staff member on your team or your first staff member it can be both exciting in its potential and daunting in terms of its ramifications. I remember when we took on our first staff member, it was this massive weight off our shoulders, and also watching them work and how they moved and how they picked was a reminder for us about how efficiency is an incredibly important part of making sure that the farm business is going to run for a long time. How have you gone about managing the high cost of labour in the Australian context with quite a large team?
It certainly is a high cost, but only when you compare it to the US situation, for example. But without that cost, I think without the comparison, I think that we're just paying people what they deserve to be paid, and what is a living wage in Australia. How we do it is, look, my experience is that putting on extra staff always results in us producing more vegetables. And in a way, it's as simple as that. I mean, there is a point where you could have the tidiest farm in the world and you're only producing 10% more, vegetables and, with every staff member you added, but at least your farm's beautiful. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's been our experience that adding a staff member really just means that your beds get flipped quicker, that your harvest days end earlier, which enables you to get back into the field and plant new things, quicker. So we've found that as long as our crops fundamentally are high enough revenue per linear metre, again, to justify anybody doing it, then it justifies a staff member doing it. And once you've satisfied that criteria, well, in general, I would say more staff will mean more vegetables, and then the problem is just selling them. And that's a very, very simple way to answer that complex question. But I think that's the way I've thought about it. And obviously you can do budgets, and okay, if I add this, X dollars, can we still afford it? If I add X dollars, how much more revenue will I need to add? Well, that's certainly calculations that you could make depending on your context. But I think in general, if the crop is worth growing, then it's worth growing with taking into account the labour cost of growing it. So it's kind of in a way, it's irrelevant, because that you don't want to be growing things that aren't going to pay enough to enable there to be a fair wage paid. The compost, the seed, the water, the electricity, the rent, and also leave a little bit over for the owner to keep.
Are you building the foundations of a market and then pulling on another staff member to kind of meet the demand, or vice versa, bring on a staff member and then pushing production and finding an outlet for it?
The latter, for sure. We don't crop. I shouldn't say we don't crop plan. We do crop plan. But it's very, very loose. And I've been pretty influenced by the lean farm sort of philosophy, which is that by not planning too much, it enables us to react very quickly to what the market is telling us. So unlike a CSA where you do need to, I need to have onions in, I need to have potatoes in, we're much more like, okay, there's a spare 5 meters, let's get something in there. It doesn't really matter what's in there. But in as much as that relates to your question about what comes first, the staff member or the sales, it's always the more vegetables we can produce. It doesn't really matter what our staff costs are, because all of our crops are profitable to be done by somebody. So our decision is always, it feels like we could grow more. We can afford it we can afford the extra staff member until those crops start to be harvested. Those extra crops, so let's say that's 3 months. So you have to be able to pay that person for 3 months based on what is already in the ground. And then once those crops that person is has some influence over renewing or planting or sowing, by the time that gets harvested, well, that's their wage paid for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think you take for granted how smoothly your operation system is running, in the sense that you've got a number of crops already that you've calculated to be working. You've got a number of tasks that you've got for staff members that you've tuned and you've worked down to being the ones that are essentially worthwhile doing, making you the money. So bringing along a staff member, they kind of slide quite nicely into a well-oiled system, which I think would make that process and transition to having a new staff member a lot easier than if you were if you hadn't worked out those steps previously.
That's right. And I think there is still, there's still a seasonal aspect to it. I think, we really saw our farm stretch at the point where we were trying to dismantle all of our tomato crops and cucumber crops, and we saw empty beds and beds with dead vines in them, which is quite rare for us. And so it's a bit like an elastic band, you sort of stretch and everyone's working hard and it feels like you're not really achieving that much. And then now we've removed all of those tomato plants, we've removed all the peppers, we've removed the cucumbers, and we've renovated the beds and we've put new things in. And now the rubber band contracts back to being a sort of manageable amount of work where we all feel like we're on top of things and we do other things. And then in spring it will again, the rubber band will expand again and we'll all feel a bit stretched. Now you could employ someone and so everyone feels comfortable year round, but it's just not the way. You're not going to make that profitable, I don't imagine. You might have, as I say, a very beautiful farm, but maybe the profit level is not as high as you otherwise like it to be. And that's the same principle we have with when running restaurants, is that you can't run a restaurant with one waiter per table to make every table right. You start at 6 o'clock and a few tables come in and the rubber band expands and we all start to walk around a bit faster. Come 7:30, everyone's run off their feet. Maybe every table is getting service half a second, later than you would ideally. But it's basically pretty good. And then as the night comes down, people get off to coffees, etc. The stress of the workforce sort of contracts in that regard. So I think it's the same with the farm, but it's much more over the year rather than over a 4-hour period of dinner.
I've had an absolutely awesome time chatting with you, which I expected, and I could probably go on for another couple of hours with you, as you know. But before we kind of close up, I wanted to ask you, what can we expect from you and the farm over the next coming seasons?
Well, I think more of that idea of like a wave of trying to nail some crops. I'd like to fail a bit less for a while. And then once we've nailed a few things, then we can, go through another wave of what do we grow next, what's interesting. We've just taken on another, our final set of 11 tunnels, and we'll get to planting them very shortly in the next week or so. We'd like to do more Italian things. I'd like to do more radicchio. I'd like to do more plant sales to people, to both our community and also to retail sales, so seedlings, etc. But yeah, just more of the same and more restaurants. There's plenty of good restaurants always opening up, and that's about it. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, I can't wait to kind of keep following on the journey on Instagram and watching how things unfold. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thanks.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode and you're enjoying the Southern Hemisphere series in general, make sure to check out the show notes for all the links, as well as how to follow our guests and host, Mikey Densham. Consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers, or just check out no-till-growers.com for more ways to support our work. This episode was produced by Mikey Densham with help from No-Till Growers. Big thanks to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.